exciting stuff.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Hangout number 41 of WP Roundtable. I'm Jason Crawford, coming to you from Medellin, Colombia. Rich.
And this is Rich. I'm a web developer calling in from Cleveland, Ohio.
You just phoned this one in.
Yeah.
Way to go, Rich.
All right,
So did I. It's okay. I'm Kellen Mace. I'm a web developer as well, doing a lot of freelance work on the east side of Michigan, kind of Metro Detroit area. Glad to be on tonight with another great guest.
Am I the fourth caller? Hi, everybody. I'm Kyle, and I'm from the Metro Jackson area in Jackson, Michigan. And I do stuff with WordPress, like make websites for clients and build cool plugins like renderwp.com. And today we've got an awesome guest on the show, as we always do, but this is a really fun one. We've got our good friend from the South, Mr. Steve Grunwell. He's a senior web engineer over at 10up. You may have heard of them. So, Steve, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, hey, I'm Steve from Columbus, Ohio. Not quite born, but raised, then college away, and then raised back, moved back, whatever. Been at 10up for about 2 months now. Enjoy speaking at conferences, writing software. I occasionally blog at stevegrunwell.com. And otherwise just sit around and really troll people on Twitter a lot.
Awesome. All right, Steve. Well, we've got tons of questions because the world wants to know more about you, and we're going to give them what they want. So before we do that, we've got to get through the picks of the week. Note, we need a sound for this. But my pick of the week, I'll give you mine first. So software. There's been a lot of great software created and invented over the course of history. And Microsoft has been a significant contributor to the world of software, and I think that everyone will agree with me. I'm just going to say this for the record. Officially, this is my belief that the greatest contribution Microsoft ever made to the software world was Clippy, hands down. Clippy was a very special contribution and is the best thing Microsoft ever made. And so, the best thing ever contributed to the WordPress.org plugin repository was Steve Grunwell's plugin, Son of Clippy. So, if you're as big a fan of Microsoft's Clippy as I am, you are going to run to the nearest browser and navigate to WordPress.org and download Son of Clippy and install it on your website so that Clippy can be in your WordPress dashboard. That's it.
I've officially lost all faith in you.
Was that a mic drop at the end?
You're having that much support for Microsoft. I cut out. I'm done.
That's it.
I guess I'll jump in. Mine is simply an article from blog.security.net. That's security.security. Anyways, there's another vulnerability out there. In our efforts to keep everybody as aware as possible, there's some vulnerabilities in page lines and platform themes. I don't use them, but it's apparently a very high risk, so get your stuff updated, folks.
All right, I'll go next. As usual, I got a plugin for you. This is a short and simple one. It's called Internal Notes. It's only got about 40 downloads, but it's a new plugin, and it just gives you a little text area in your admin on Pages and Posts where you can just write some notes to yourself. So as you're, if you're like me and you have 4 or 5 blog posts that you're brewing and you have some thoughts, it's a good place right on your admin screen to just jot down a few things. That way you're not clogging up your, entry bar and everything. It's a nice little sidebar. It never gets visible to the public. So once again, it's called Internal Notes.
Cool, thanks, Rich. I'll dive in next with my pick of the week, and it is SQL Pro. 2 experienced devs out there, like our guest tonight. This is probably old hat. They've been around for ages. But myself, I recently was turned on to it by a friend of mine for the longest time had been just using PHP MyAdmin in the browser to see view databases, and I was enlightened that there's a better way if you're doing things locally to have SQL Pro, which is free. You can go download it, install it, and just point it to wherever your database lives, and it's quicker and handier and great tool. So if you haven't, you should check it out too.
Good call. I love SQL Pro. I was actually using that back when it was Cocoa MySQL. Not because I started that far back, but because I was working on a really old machine when I started as a developer. So it was whatever 10.3 or 10.4 was.
Nice.
Since I guess I'm supposed to have a pick of the week as well, I'd like to point out that I'm really excited about some of the core feature plugins that are going into WordPress right now. For those of you not familiar, that's when WordPress kind of goes, hey, we really like this feature, but we're not really sure if we're ready to kind of roll it out across the board, so we'll develop it as a plugin instead. And then if it kind of gains traction and we like how it's working, we can merge it in. So there are two in particular. There's the Customizer Theme Switcher, which is looking to unify the theme customizer and the theme selection screen, so you can say, yeah, I want to customize this theme and make it active and just go with it. The other is the Press This bookmarklet. There's an effort to really kind of, it's always kind of been a half-baked sort of thing, so to get more of like an Evernote type experience so people can really actually use things and say, yeah, I want to grab this text and I want to publish it immediately. And so some really cool work going on. If you want to get involved, they're both open source. It's make.wordpress.org/core/features-as-plugins.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. You did forget to mention, though, what about Son of Clippy? That's going to be a future feature plugin. Was I mistaken on that assumption?
What was that?
Son of Clippy is going to be a feature plugin. Is that correct?
No, I don't think there's any risk of that ever ending up in core.
But didn't Matt bring it up at Pressnomics? Didn't Matt talk about the future coming of that?
If he did, I must have overlooked that.
It wasn't recorded,
may
so
have
we
been
can't.
willful
We'll never
omission.
know.
Repression. There are a lot of things that. No, I mean it's a novelty plugin that I put out there. It's the first time I've developed a plugin primarily to troll a coworker. Someone was like, "Oh, we should write a tool to be more." I don't mind hiding his name. Eric Mann. He's a lead web engineer at 10up. Great speaker, good friend, and in that order. Great speaker, good friend. Not great friend, good friend. But he's like, well, we should have a writing assistant to really help make sure that like people are writing their content correctly. And it's like, so Clippy for WordPress? And he was like, oh yeah, that would be perfect. Get on it. So not want to back down from a challenge, I spent the weekend after Thanksgiving building Son of Clippy, which uses clippy.js. There's a whole, of course there is, a whole JavaScript library dedicated to, here, embed Clippy in whatever you want, and this sticks it into WordPress for you.
That's so great. I love it. We love it. It's just the greatest plugin that there is out there. So, moving on, because we got so much more that we want to know about. Steve, let's start at the beginning. Give us the rundown. How did you get into what you're doing today? What's the long and winding road that brought you to being a 10up web engineer?
Well, I actually started as a video major. I was doing video work in high school. Won the Worthington Film Festival in '05. Not to brag, it was kind of a big deal. No. And when I got into college, I'm like, I don't really know what I want to do, but I enjoy doing videos, so I'll just declare a major in video, and when I find something better, I'll switch. I ended up doing an internship at a shop called Sea Lion Studio, which was a small, like 5 to 10 person shop. It fluctuated. That really focused on giving college students the opportunity to really kind of get some real-world agency experience. And I started there as a video intern. Then that summer, they hired me on full-time, but I got, well, not full-time, part-time. I was working there like 25 hours a week, but they also had this guy, Jason, come in, who was a video co-op. And they're like, well, Jason's here 40 hours a week, you're here 25, so we're going to give Jason a lot of the the bigger projects. But about that same time, our designer slash developer left, and they're like, hey, we don't have anyone else who can write code, so you try to make heads or tails out of this PHP? And I'm like, yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, before that I had written like BASIC on a TI-83 in high school. And I loved it. It was all of the problem solving that I love so much, and without having to worry about like, oh, well, I need, this person to be available and this person to be available. It was really something like, here's a goal, it needs to get accomplished, it's on you, and go. And up until I got to TenUp, that was really a large part of my career. There was usually, a designer involved, and maybe there would be some separation of front-end and back-end development, but it's really kind of been like, I've been used to doing that one-man show kind of thing. So after I left Bowling Green, I did 2.5, 3 years at an agency here in town, Falkern Moortime. Got to work with some bigger brands, Elmer's, Experience Columbus, the Greater Columbus Arts Council. Some really cool stuff, and we did work for the Columbus Bicentennial. From there, I ended up at Buckeye Interactive, which is a smaller, more development-focused shop. I was there for 2 years. And then the allure of TenUp, I just couldn't say no. So I started there in November, and have been loving it so far. It's an awesome group of people, and for once, it's not just here's a project, Steve, go take care of it. It's here's a project, and this person's going to take this part, and this person's going to take this part. So it's there's an adjustment period of getting used to not being like the developer on it, but at the same time, I'm surrounded by a lot of really. So it's been a good opportunity to learn and continue to grow.
Oh, I can imagine. So tell us about what kind of projects you get to be working on. I believe you're the first person from 10Up to be on our show so far.
Yeah, I checked your previous guests, and it looks like I am.
You checked.
Yeah. No big deal. Just did my research.
That's great. So tell us about the clients that you're serving and the projects you're getting involved with at 10Up.
Okay. Well, 10Up, we do a lot of work with some major publishing companies. So, I mean, you have things like Nate Silver's 538, TechCrunch, Main Today. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about the client that I'm working on right now. I kind of have one major client at this point. But for this client, we're migrating them from another CMS into WordPress VIP, which is definitely an involved process. And it's a news agency, so they have a lot of historical data. So kind of my main task on it so far has been writing migration scripts. So they have basic JSON API set up, the kind of thing where I go, hey, I need to get that article, so I have to make like 5 different API requests, not including when it gets to the images, but writing that and knowing that we can run this WP-CLI script and pull over just thousands and thousands. I mean, there are a few different sites involved, and I think the smallest one is like 12,000 sites, and the largest is going to be like 25, 30,000 stories being pulled over, along with related media and everything else. But yeah, I mean, 10Up does a lot of great publishing work. We do a lot of work with. It seems like we've been getting a lot of replatforming type work. People going, hey, we see that WordPress is totally kicking butt in this space. We want to be there. Our competition's moving there, and they're having great success, and we want an awesome agency to help us move into that space. So it's so far so good.
That's great. That's great. So what do you think about this when you compare it to the work that you got to do in the past, and now you're here a distributed company providing these, really leveraging your skill set as a developer. It sounds like you're really happy with what you're doing right now.
I am, yeah. And I mean, compared to things that I did in the past, I did a lot of marketing sites where it was kind of, oh, we need to set up a few pages and maybe some custom post types for this or that. But it tended to be a smaller scale kind of project. And now to go from that to like, it's 0 to 100 here. to just be like, oh, and by the way, this is going to be like a giant site, and we need to, we have a whole pod of developers working on it, and the fact that it's going on to VIP, which if you haven't worked with WordPress VIP, that presents its own set of challenges, because everything that goes on to WordPress VIP is code reviewed by the VIP team. So every time you're like, oh, I don't really need to escape that output, and it's like, no, you really do. So it's like you're operating on a very high level with a high amount of scrutiny. So it can be intimidating coming into it, but again, the people that I work with are really great. So we were making jokes. One of the importers, we were running it on staging today, and it was like, it's taking down a server. There was, a memory leak here and there, and instead of going like, oh, Steve, what are you doing? You ruined everything. It was much more of a, okay, well, let's actually, get a few sets of eyes on this and figure out why it's not working the way it should be, and we move on. It's not this blame game, which I guess is, not that I expected it to be a blame game going into it, but it's really reassuring to get there and then not have to worry about like, oh, everyone's going to think I'm stupid, which is, it's a relief, to be honest.
Nice. So can we take a step back for a moment and tell us what your daily life is like? I mean, what time you show up at work, what do you do before work, if you've got anything exciting going on, and just go through the day for us.
Okay. Well, 10up is a distributed company, so the space you see around me is my basement office, which is where I work every day. Once in a while I get out and go to coffee shops or something like that, but the entire company, my team, a lot of us are based in the US, but we have, he's being transferred to a different pod, but a gentleman who's in South Africa, we have Sudhar who's out in India. So time zones get to be a fun issue, but really the day is kind of an 8:30 to 5:30. I make some breakfast and some coffee, come downstairs, catch up on HipChat, which is our communication tool of choice, and we have 3 meetings a week with the rest of my pod, which 10up divides the company into what we call pods, which are groups of like 5 to 15-ish people. So that it's not just, oh, here you are in a group of like 100 plus. It's, you have access to everybody, but you have a much smaller group that's kind of your day-to-day group that you go to and share projects with. So we have meetings with the pod and meetings with projects, but it's really, it's a good environment to be able to say, I need to focus on this code, so I'm going to maybe shut down HipChat or minimize it. You want to make sure you're available, but to really get stuff done, which compared to being in like an office environment where someone can easily come up and be like, hey, did you see The Walking Dead last night? It's like, yeah, I saw it and I loved it, but I have stuff to do. And as developers, we've all been there where you're working on a piece of code and someone comes up and starts talking to you, even if it's just something very quick, but then it all just kind of drifts away and you don't know what the heck you were thinking about before. So it's nice to kind of be able to go, I need to make sure I'm not getting distracted, so I'll just minimize those distractions, and unless my dog comes up and goes, hey, you need to put me outside, and then I'll be like, holy crap, talking dog. It's a good environment for concentrating and for getting stuff done without feeling disconnected. I wrote a blog post, it was after 30 days at 10up, so I think I just crossed 60 days last week. But it was kind of this, I was nervous about the adjustment going into it. I'm an outgoing person, which lends itself to the speaking and everything, but I was worried that it would just be like, I'm going to feel isolated, I'm going to be in that basement, it's just going to be, but I don't feel detached at all, despite the fact that the nearest person, or the person in the company who lives closest to me, first of all, isn't on my pod, and he's in Cincinnati. That's 2 hours from where I am driving. But I don't feel separated, which is really a cool, different, unexpected feeling.
Nice. So one quick touch-up on that. You kind of went through that, but what do you have set hours, or do you pick your own on that?
We're technically supposed to be available between the core hours of like 9:30 and 4:30 our local time, And when we go to lunch or whatever, take our phone. So if something blows up, but it's definitely a more flexible. As long as your team knows where you are, you're able to set your own schedule. Because if you're working until midnight, great. There are other people in the company who are working until 5 o'clock their time, which happens to be midnight your time. So it's not just like someone sitting in the office in the dark after work.
So you mentioned a couple times about pods, and I know I've read things about 10up and their structure, but can you go into a little bit of detail on how the pods work at 10up and why you guys are set up in pods? What's the whole rationale behind that, and what do you think? Does it work?
Yeah, the rationale behind it is that when you get more than a dozen or so people, communication can break down. You end up with, oh, I didn't really talk to that person because I didn't have anything that I really needed to say to them, but then I don't know what they're working on, and it turns out we were duplicating efforts or something like that. So it's this idea of we can scale kind of horizontally rather than have to deal with like, oh, and then we need a manager for the managers for the managers. Each pod has a pod leader, which is our strategist / project manager for the pod, as well as technical co-lead, who's kind of the dev manager, and it's an engineer. It's not someone who's just in a management position, but it's someone who's able to say, okay, as we approach new projects, this is the technical direction that we need to take, and let me make sure that all of the developers are on the same page. And if we're doing like VIP, because there's a code review process there, we're making sure we're code reviewing everything internally before it's going to VIP, because we don't want to waste their time if there's something that we could catch earlier. And then above all of the technical co-leads, they have a single developer or development manager that they report to, director, as well as with the project managers. So there's hierarchy there, but we're able to we just added a couple new pods because 10up is growing quite rapidly, but we're able to add that on without it seeming like, oh, we just added 10 people, because it's just it's scaling outward. If that makes sense.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. It must be pretty cool to get to work with such talented individuals. 10up is consists of a pretty big team for an agency, broken down into these pods like you described, and a lot of like the big names, a lot of the real good WordPress devs out there. It's just kind of the Hall of Fame is the staff page on 10up.com.
You mean like the fact that we employ 2 WordPress release leads now that Drew James is the 4.2 lead?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, 4.2 is being led by Drew James, is a 10up employee, and 4.0 is led by Helen Missandi. It was your platform director.
Platform experience director, I believe, is her technical
right.
title, but it's Helen. I mean, she's awesome.
Yes, she is great, and you guys have a lot of great people on your team. It must be really, really neat to get to work on a team like that. I can't imagine. I've never had the privilege of that, and I've been told by smart people before that if you really want to go somewhere in your career, I think it was Topher who said this to me, that the smart thing to do is go work somewhere where you know the least of everyone.
Yeah.
If you really want to go somewhere, that's the best thing to do. And
you don't want to be the smartest guy in the room.
Not to diminish your skill set, which I wouldn't, but going to work at a place like 10up would make me think of something like that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Topher, because he's actually one of the ones who, when I was at WordCamp Grand Rapids, I was talking to him, and I'm like, well, I'm really thinking about like doing a remote gig, but I'm not quite sure, and I feel like I'm going to just be isolated, and he's like, you know what, worst thing you can do is try it, not like it, and you go back to like a regular agency. But it was a conscious decision that I wanted to surround myself with people who know way more than I do, and I'm fortunate that I got to go in and I can say, oh, I'm a senior web engineer at 10up, but at the same time, I mean, not that I don't know, the senior distinction is kind of funny because it basically comes down to, well, are these people allowed to commit to master? Because there's no junior level anything at 10up, because we're all same reason why we go by engineer rather than developer or code monkey or WordPress ninja or anything like that, because engineers solve problems, right? That's what we do. So clients, they come to us and it's not just, oh, well, we want a site. They come to us because they go, we have a problem and we know that nobody knows WordPress the way you guys do, and we want something that's going to be awesome. So that's why people choose 10up, and that's why 10up, we don't have, oh, here's someone who doesn't really know what they're doing and we have to totally hold their hands. We're all for educating people and helping them grow as developers, but it's the passion that really matters, because a passionate developer, if they don't know something today, they may very well know it next week. It's the developers who go, yeah, I don't really care. Development's just, I hear there's good money in it, so I'm just going to do that for a living. Like, no one's really interested in hiring that, 10up or otherwise, because it's, you want the people who are willing to be challenged, are willing to admit, that nothing that we do is going to be perfect, so we just have to keep trying for that infinite level of perfection out there, and helping other people along the way. That's why 10up's very active in conference speaking and a lot of core contributions besides just Helen and Drew. Like we have, let's see, I have the numbers here somewhere. On WordPress 4.1, we had 13 people who received props in the 4.1 release notes, which, and from what I understand, that's actually kind of low. We've had some that were up in more like the 30 realm. So it's all about giving back to the community and challenging each other, and just continuing to grow as a team and as individuals.
That's awesome, Steve. I was thinking also, as you're talking about 10up's contributions to core and to the community, reading last year, we spoke about Helen briefly, right? And last year it was announced that she would be sponsored essentially by 10up to work exclusively on core for a little while. Is that still going on with her or others?
I don't know the exact terms around it. I know that Helen does a lot of core contributions during the day. She's also doing some internal work, but I don't know if client work is on her docket. But I mentioned earlier we use HipChat for communication.
Yeah.
We have a whole HipChat room dedicated to core stuff where people, if you're familiar with Rachel Baker, who's one of the lead developers on the WordPress JSON REST API, she also works at 10up. And, like the core room is always kind of dominated by, people who maybe they're working on their lunch period, maybe they're, able to set aside some time to work on core. Again, I haven't been there all that long, so I don't know exactly how all of it works, but I mean, there's a lot of stuff after hours and during business hours where 10uppers are consistently contributing to WordPress core and the community and the forums and Stack Overflow, and I mean, it's just, I sound like I'm really like, oh, let me get on here to pimp 10up, but I love the place. It's really a cool company. So excuse me if I seem a little too excited about it.
That's all right.
That is quite all right. Hey, it's much better than the alternative, right? Hey, you work at 10up. How is that? Okay, I guess. Yeah. You really love where you work, and that's something to be happy about. Really briefly too, I wanted to ask a question related to 10up's explosive growth. I think is probably a good word, right? So I had read that when Jake started it, I think within the first 2 years, the stat I had heard was it went from 1 employee himself to, I think the number was 37 or something in 2 years, and then now I think, what is it, the upper 90s employees, and you're hiring for 12.
I believe we broke 100.
Is that right?
In 2015, yeah.
Dang. Okay. And I heard just a few days ago. Now there's another round of hiring for 12 developers. Is the number I heard, which is insane to me. So my question is, how is that done? How did 10up, and I know you said you've only been there since November, but how did 10up manage to like leapfrog all these other agencies that are out there that are jockeying for a position and trying to land these larger enterprise clients and big time publishers, that kind of thing? What have you seen there that would speak to that or answer that question for how 10up's able to consistently land those types of clients and get that kind of growth?
Well, from what I've seen, as far as the scaling process goes, the pod architecture that I mentioned earlier, that definitely helps, because it's not, suddenly someone has like 500 people working under them and they have no idea like what everyone's doing. I think the quality of work that we put out, being a WordPress VIP partner agency certainly doesn't hurt. We're a technology partner for WordPress.com VIP. So when you get, like Time and another big company is going like, hey, we're looking for someone who really knows, how to scale WordPress. We're one of only a handful of names that show up, and it's like, hey, have you considered these guys? And we really strive to make, I'm going to misquote the mantra, so I'm not really going to say it, but we want to make publishing easy, maybe even fun. I believe that's the line. I may have botched that, and then I'll just get fired. So thank you so much. But I mean, we care about the user experience. It's not just here's WordPress and just write some stuff and there you go. We do everything we can to tailor the experience to make it as easy for our clients to use as possible, as intuitive, while being performant, and being a good model of what WordPress development should be. Late last year, 10up published the WordPress development standards. Not just WordPress. There's a JavaScript one and a few others. It's on GitHub and got passed around a lot.
Engineering guidelines, right?
Yes. Thank you. And that's just an opportunity for 10up to say, this is what's worked for us as we've worked on these enterprise level clients. And these are the most performant ways to do things. These are the gotchas you're not thinking about, like, oh, if I don't set these flags in WP Query, it's running extra crap behind the scenes that we don't need it to run. And I completely lost my train of thoughts. This is why I shouldn't read the comments.
Gotcha.
So that's minus how many points for me?
A lot.
No, but I think we do a very good job of putting ourselves out there and saying, listen, we hire awesome people who want to do awesome work, and we can back that up, and then other awesome people are like, hey, they're awesome people who do awesome work. I want to go do awesome work too. And it's not an official 10up site, but there is a site, is10uphiring.com, which just consistently says yes. It's the more resources we have, the more work we can sell, and our sales team is awesome, and we just keep bringing in some awesome, fun projects.
All right, so let me close the 10up advertising segment with this question. You're new to the company, so you've acquired a decent amount of knowledge after 2 months. You obviously love it there, the structure. There's a lot of growth. You have some really great contributors. What do you see from your rookie stance and what you've heard from Jake and things like that? What do you see big picture down the road? Obviously, you can scale. So what are you predicting? Long term. Where are you going to grow?
I can't really speak to client base, but the type of work, I think that there's a common belief that once the WordPress JSON REST API hits core, especially right now it's a feature plugin, but once that hits core, that's going to really change the way people look at WordPress, because you could build a WordPress site that's using WordPress for the back end. The front end could be totally detached. You could build a flat site that's just using the JSON API to pull in data, and WordPress, like you're not even touching the template tags or anything like that. And as things move that way, assuming things move that way, I mentioned Rachel earlier. I mean, we employ one of the lead developers on the REST API core. So as far as companies that like really know, the JSON REST API, we kind of have an in. And she's a fantastic developer, and I add that to all of the other great developers we have, and some of the work that we've been doing as far as community contributions when it comes to like VVV. If you guys are familiar with, I always stumble when I say it. I'm just going to leave it at VVV. But I mean, that's a 10-up, which we've then spun off into a community project. Tons of plugins out there. It's just, I think as we continue to grow, it's going to really be finding opportunities to continue to do sweet things with WordPress, and that feels like a cop-out. So let's just go back to the API thing and say, yeah, API, and we're awesome with it. So
that works.
So, Steve, you're a PHP guy, and you go to PHP conferences and stuff. So let's talk about PHP a little bit, if we can. So some people, they just keep telling me, they just keep hating on PHP. So what's that about? I mean, what's the big problem? PHP is great, right? Help me out. Help me understand this.
You got to hang out with nicer people. I mean, PHP picked up the stigma, a few years ago, and it was, oh well, PHP, it runs anywhere. It's really easy to get started. You can write it using totally free software. Whereas with .NET, it's like, well, you have to be running on Windows, and you should be using Visual Studio and all of this. And so PHP kind of became the punching bag, because it's like, oh, it's programming junior. It's this lesser language, and that's absolutely not the case, especially PHP 5.3 and up. We've added a lot of support for more true object-oriented type programming, and it's gotten way faster. I mean, if you've played with 5.5 and it is 5.6 even, and we're coming into PHP 7 within the next couple years, because we're skipping 6 for some reason. I know the reason, but it doesn't matter. But it's fun to rag on PHP, because yeah, it is easy to get started. But it's a powerful language, and is it the perfect language for everything? Absolutely not. Is .NET, Java, C#, or any of those, the perfect language for everything? No. So it's about picking the right language for the project you're working on, and especially for web publishing, PHP does a damn good job.
I think you're right. I think PHP is remarkably accessible, and yet at the same time quite powerful. So that's pretty cool. Do you have experience in other languages outside of PHP?
I've done some work in Ruby, done a couple Rails projects, mostly maintenance type stuff. Obviously, when you get into, I've worked with JavaScript and everything, but as far as like major backend languages, Ruby is kind of the secondary one.
All right. So another question for you. How about this? I'm hearing that this thing called Git is this great way to make backups of your sites or something like that. Just a TLDR of your talk or whatever. So is that right?
Absolutely not. Git is well suited for source control and for you to troll me on podcasts. Definitely not for site backups.
Thanks for sharing that. So
yeah.
You've given some great Git talks at a couple of conferences, and I've watched some of them as well, and they've been very informative. So you have a lot of experience with Git. I imagine you use it daily for all of your development work. Now you're doing presentations at WordCamps and filling up the rooms with people seeking your wisdom.
With tens of viewers, yes.
Yeah. Git is pretty special. What makes Git so great as a version control option?
Well, there are several version control systems out there, but the two major ones right now are Git and Subversion. Subversion is a centralized version control system. WordPress core, I think everyone on here has written plugins before and submitted them to the WordPress.org repository. You get the Subversion repository, and it's like, oh, okay, add your changes, add your commit message, and you better be connected to the internet because it's going to send it all up. And whereas Git is a distributed version control system, meaning you have an entire copy of the repository, and you can make commits and be totally offline. You can host it in multiple places. It's very easy to say, yeah, push it to origin and then push it to, maybe I want to keep a second copy of stuff in a private Bitbucket repo or something. Just in case I screw something up, or I really want to make sure I have a second copy, or I want to share that with someone, or for archival purposes, or whatever. But with Subversion, you're dealing with you're pushing to one central repository, and if something goes wrong, it becomes a giant pain in the butt. And with Git, you have your own copy. You can move around with it, and it also makes branching considerably easier. So, like at 10up, whenever we do development of a new feature, we go, oh, okay, git checkout -b feature / whatever, and we write all of our code in that feature, and then once it's been code reviewed, we can then push that, merge it back into master, and we go, okay, this is the code that we wrote for feature A, and then when feature B comes in later, we're writing that in a branch. It's a pretty typical branch development workflow, but it makes it much easier to separate things and to make deployments and go, oh, well, that feature wasn't approved by the client yet. We need to make sure that that doesn't get pushed out. And Git just makes that very easy.
Yes, it does. Well put. Thank you for sharing that, Steve. If anybody's watching this, they can know that we'll also answer their questions if they have anything they want to ask Steve. We've got a few minutes left. So I've got a couple that I want to ask. I don't know about the other guys, but the WordPress community, that's a big part for all of us, a big thing for all of us. We all participate in some way. What stories can you tell that illustrate how valuable it is to participate in the WordPress community? Why is it worthwhile for someone using WordPress to participate more in the community?
I think the single biggest thing, and in my stories I'm not going to name any names, but and this wasn't a WordPress-specific conference, but it was WordPress-oriented. At PHP World, I met a young developer who was working at, it was a small shop. She didn't feel appreciated. She definitely knew more than she thought she knew. And I was sitting there, we had dinner, and it was a whole table of us. I know Jenny Wong from Human Made specifically, she and I were talking to this developer, and we were like, you can't sit there and let people walk all over you because you feel like you're not good enough. And if you're familiar with the term imposter syndrome, I mean that's really what it was. It was this developer who was afraid that she didn't have what it took to to work at a bigger shop or to apply to a company like 10up or Automatic or Human Made or WebDev or any other company. And she was geographically limited. So that's why I named specifically the distributed companies. But as we were talking her through, it was kind of like, okay, well, have you done any projects where you had to do something like this? And she's like, oh yeah, I've done a dozen of those because it was and this is how I approached it, and then I figured out after the first time I did it that wasn't the way to do it. So then on the second one, I was, changed my approach and it worked much better. And it's like, you're sitting here telling us that you're not good enough, you don't know, and this is, this, you're learning, it's all part of our growth, the great developer journey, and a community, and I know this was on the peripheral of WordPress, but the community is important to help you gauge where you are, where you want to be going, and put you in touch with the people who can help you get past roadblocks as they come up. Is that
awesome.
Heartwarming?
Yeah, yeah, that is. That's a great story. I'm giving a talk at a local meetup this week, and just something like that is the topic. Why should you participate, and how can you participate? It's just interesting to hear stories from people who have participated a lot in the community about what a difference it's made to them. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you, and then maybe also the people that you work with, participate in the community, most specifically yourself.
Okay. Well, my main contributions are driven through plugin development, plugins like Sonic Clippy. How would we survive without that? I do a lot of blogging, not a lot of blogging. I blog occasionally, but it tends to get decent traffic, and it's usually, I was trying to figure out how to do this, and I spent 2.5 hours spinning my wheels trying to get this. So let me burn the rest of that third hour in writing up a blog post about it. And that's where a lot of the traffic comes from. Someone's like, oh, crap, how do I do X? There was this one post at my last job. I had to do a WooCommerce site, and it was free shipping to the continental United States. Alaska and Hawaii weren't eligible for free shipping, but that's not something that's built into WooCommerce. So I had to do digging and figure out, like, okay, well, at the time I had to override a class, which meant kind of like override the bootstrap process so I could load my class instead of their class, and it was gross. And then a new version of WooCommerce came out, and suddenly it was way easier. It was a filter in like 2 lines of code. But people find this blog post because they're like, oh yeah, because I have this company that there was one that sells bass amps, and they needed to be able to do the same thing. Where they're like, it costs a lot to ship like a bass cabinet to Hawaii, so we need to actually make sure we cover that charge. So it's kind of putting that stuff out there that could help other people. I mentioned before, and you've mentioned that I speak whenever people will listen. I tend to ramble, but what are you going to do? I've had a few attempts at core commits. 4.1 was my first time actually getting, 4.1, getting props. They were technically for documentation updates, but hey, it still counts. It's a core commit. I'm in the release notes. And outside of that, I spend some time on the WordPress.org forums, Stack Overflow, things like that. Wherever I can try to help people out.
So, talking about helping people out, and something you had mentioned before, imposter syndrome, I'm going to toot our little horn here ourselves. You want to maybe mention our panel discussion that we're planning for future upcoming WordCamps and how excited we are? And I know it's something you and I are, it's very near and dear to our heart, something we deal with, and go for it.
Absolutely. Happy to announce that Rich, Angela Bergman, Jeff Chandler, and I are working on a panel for imposter syndrome that we want to start touring around different WordCamps. An opportunity to really get up on stage, and we'd like the session to be interactive, but it's really talking about imposter syndrome, which I had mentioned earlier. That feeling of, oh, I'm not good enough, I don't know enough, everyone's way smarter than me, and to be able to really break that down and look at not only what is imposter syndrome, but how does it affect people, and what can we do to help get past imposter syndrome, because it's something that most devs will go through at some point, if not chronically. So to kind of have this soft skills, touchy-feely, I don't want to describe it that way, but it's like a big group hug of people going, no, seriously, like, you can get through this, and if you care enough, to want to better yourself, then you're already good enough.
Well, and one of the things with imposter syndrome is you always think it's just you. I know you and I have talked about that. In fact, when you and I were talking about developing this, you even mentioned, hey, Rich, you know how imposter that sounds, what you just said? I mean, you called me out for being an imposter while we were talking about presenting imposter syndrome. So I know everybody being able to just go, wow, I understand that. I'm not the only one. I mean, that's such a big part of it.
Yeah.
Chris Lemma has had some, spectacular posts last year, I think it was, about imposter, and that blew me away. And I met Chris Lemma at WordCamp San Francisco, and it just amazes me that somebody like him has imposter syndrome. When I was down at WordCamp Orlando, David Bissett. I mean, these are some amazing guys, and they have it. So it really opened up the topic for me to think some of these, huge players in our arena have imposter syndrome. That can't be. So it's not just me. So yeah, I'm excited to present with you and Angela and Jeff and talk about it, because there's a lot of us out there that suffer with it, and I know you and I have talked at length about it, and I'm looking forward to that.
Me too. So check that out. Hopefully premiering at WordCamp Dayton. Plug party.
Yeah.
Don't forget, 10up is hiring. Son of Cliffy.
Is 10up hiring?
Absolutely.
Yes.
That reminds me of, Steve. There's this not far, like a few cities away. There's this kind of rundown motel, and between where I live in Detroit, called the Wardell Motel. It's been there for ages, but they have out front they have the permanent vacancy sign. It's not like a light. It's not a light you can switch on and off. It's just like the Wardell Motel.
Painted on the wall.
This wooden sign, and then below it, like still part of the wood, the word vacancy, just all caps. It's
I don't think 10ups can go that far. Like, we're always looking for good talent, but it's not just, let's just hire people so we have people. I mean, it's a strategic growth, but it's
right.
It happens to be, we have the work and the the work to support it.
Yeah.
Well, Kellen, I've got an idea. If I ever do make it up there to visit you, we've got to rent that entire hotel out.
I know.
And just see what happens the one day they don't have a vacancy anymore.
Right.
It'll just burst into flames.
We'll just do like a little WordCamp right there, right there at the hotel, and fill it up with everybody and see what they do.
We're gonna rent out all your rooms. Are you sure? No one's ever. That's never happened before. So they'll have to get a couple, black plastic bags and just tape them over the sign. They'll have no other option. I don't know.
They're like, sorry, you can't rent some of these. There are still, like, corpses in them.
Oh, no.
Sorry, I don't mean to get dark there, but it's a rundown motel.
Right.
Outside Detroit. Like, yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope that's not what it's like down in Dayton coming up here, because I don't know where I'm going to stay. I'm still looking for lodging options for WordCamp Dayton, so I hope we find something good.
You could always enlist and then stay at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Oh, I never even thought of that. That's so creative.
Yeah, I don't know how well that would go over.
Will they let me come back home after the weekend?
That would be called going AWOL.
I
think they'll appreciate that.
Okay, so it's a good time to ask you, Steve, in person, in the flesh, Steve, beard, glasses, and all, where could people actually bump into you over the course of 2015?
Well, if you know where I live, but I hope you don't. I'm assuming you're talking more about conferences and things. I hope. So,
although Steve did say he's willing to host anybody for good toast. He loves toast.
I'm almost out of that loaf of bread, though, so I may have to make a run to the bakery. No, but WordCamp Dayton, I've applied to speak there, and even if I don't get accepted, it's not far from Columbus. North Canton, I had an awesome experience there last year. Can't wait to go back. WordCamp Columbus, obviously, and seeing how things go, but hopefully WordCamp Grand Rapids and maybe even Chicago this year. Beyond that, PHP World. If I get accepted to go back, that's in November. Got to speak there last year for the inaugural event, and it's one of my favorite conferences I've ever attended. Really awesome, and it's not just WordPress specifically. It's you have WordPress, you have Drupal, you have Magento, I know, Laravel, Symfony. Just anyone who works in any area of PHP came together in Washington, D.C., which was that was really cool. D.C. is an awesome city. I love that place. So I'm always looking for an opportunity to go back.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like a good year for you, Steve. Pretty exciting, and we hope to hang out with you and throw a few back at some after parties over the course of this year. It'll be a good time.
Looking forward to it.
All right. So just some final questions. What's next for Steve Grunwell? What's big?
Well, I want to speak as much as possible. I really enjoy getting out, getting to meet people. Plus, it's always kind of nice when people are like, "Hey, can I buy you a drink? I really enjoyed your talk." Because then I get a compliment and a beer. In 2014, Eric Mann, who I mentioned earlier, one of my coworkers, he blogged every single day, and then he would really get on everyone in the pod about like, "Well, why don't you blog about it? You should blog about it. Why don't you blog more? Why?" And as much as I hate to give into that peer pressure, I do want to get in the habit of blogging more. I think the last thing I published was a thing that was like, "Hey, in 2015, I'm going to try to blog more," and that was like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. So I want to start generating more content there, but I want it to be meaningful. Like I was talking about earlier, I want it to be helpful things. Outside of that, the main thing is just, I am kind of one of the low guys on the totem pole at 10up, so doing what I can to stand out among such a crowd of awesome people. So probably means a lot of hacking on Hubot and doing awesome work, not necessarily in that order. I guess the work should probably come first, but trying to make my mark.
All right. So if you get accepted to speak at some of these conferences that you mentioned, what kind of talks can we expect you to be putting together?
I have a few new talks. Last year I was kind of doing some of the same talks over and over, and I refine them each time and everything, but looking to do, besides the imposter syndrome talk that Rich and I were talking about earlier, kind of get back to some of the more WordPress fundamental type talks, understanding actions and filters and how the transients API works and things like that, but also getting into some of the soft skills beyond imposter syndrome. I wrote a blog series for Buckeye back in, I think it was late 2012, called Professional Development for the Professional Developer. So I've been submitting that to a few conferences. It's based around kind of the skills that a developer can use to continue to grow and prevent themselves from stagnating. Because it's really easy, especially if you're working in an agency that maybe has quick turnaround times or something, where you're kind of building the same project over and over, and you just kind of get on autopilot, and then you stop growing. And if you stop growing, then you stop having fun. You stop, making yourself a candidate for like awesomeness. So the skills that you can use to ensure that you continue to grow. Also, I have one that I submitted a few places at this point. I'm going to screw up the title, and I picked the thing because I love the title. But when I started at 10up, Eric, who I mentioned earlier, is really into unit testing, like hardcore about unit testing. So when I was writing the Shine importer, he's like, "Well, you're going to write unit tests for it, right?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, okay, I can do that." So, and it was a huge struggle to get started because you have to kind of get in that mindset. But then once it clicked, it was like, I don't want to write things without tests ever again because this is fantastic. Yeah, it takes a little longer to get started, but when you start having to, especially with something like a migration tool, where suddenly, oh, well, the API changed, so you need to make sure that you're accommodating for, it's like, well, because I have all these unit tests, or, I fix a bug and I write a test for it so that I don't have to worry about, the code regression later. The talk I want to give is testing like you've never tested before, in parentheses, because you haven't. And it's meant to be that, let me take my couple weeks of struggle and put it into 45 minutes, an hour of, no, let's get to the fundamentals and you understand, like, oh, okay, so that people can be in there and they can click, and then it's not this, like, burning hours type thing.
That sounds like a really useful talk, and I hope that one gets chosen because I want to attend it.
Thank you.
Yeah, good choice. Okay, so we're about out of time here. So one other quick question I wanted to throw at you: what suggestions do you have, recommendations for future guests that we should invite on the show who would make a good interview?
Is it cool if I throw 3 10-up people at you?
Yes.
Okay. Rachel Baker, who I mentioned earlier, who's one of the lead devs on the JSON REST API, and just generally all-around awesome dev. You could always get Drew Janes, the WordPress 4.2 release lead, just throwing that out there. And the guy whose name has been said more than mine in this podcast, Eric Mann, lead web engineer at 10up, who's also a speaker and, as I mentioned earlier, good, not great friend.
Okay.
I hope he's watching this.
Yeah. Thank you. So I'll be hitting those people up. So thanks for your recommendation. Is there anything that we didn't get to talk about, guys? Any topics you wanted to cover, or announcements, or anything, Steve? Okay. All right, guys, we're good. I think that's a wrap. I think that's episode 41 in the books. Thanks so much, Steve Grunwell, for popping in, and we wish you all the best, and I can't wait to bump into you in person in a couple months here.
Looking forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Steve.
Thanks
really
a lot.
good.
Thanks, Steve.